Thanks very much, Murad. I just want to deal with the arguments about what we should be doing now, because the situation has been transformed by the judgment on Monday. Now, we obviously don't like a great deal of what was said, 95% of that judge's judgment, and I'll come on to what we should do about that in a moment. But we should understand that the lifting of the threat of extradition on whatever grounds is an enormous watershed in this case. It means that Julian does not currently isn't currently threatened with being taken into the United States, tried on espionage charges, and thrown into a very dark hole in the US penal system. Now, of course, he should have been immediately released on bail, and that's an issue that we'll address as well. But for a moment, step back and think on this, that for the first time in the best part of a decade, the situation for Julian Assange has improved. That this now looks like a very, very winnable battle for him and for the rest of us. And to be honest, if you're in politics long enough, you'll realize that all victories don't come as cleanly or as pristinely as you would have wanted them. But nevertheless, when people look back on this, they will only see two things. The United States tried to get him and they didn't succeed. And that is what will matter more than any other single thing. So take heart from that decision. And now let's survey the territory that we have to fight on now that that decision has been taken. First of all, that decision has to be defended. The United States has said that it will appeal that decision in the High Court. It may not come to that. The Biden administration may not go down that route, but at the moment, very clear in the bail hearings, the US lawyers are preparing an appeal. Now, that will be fought over the only condition on which Vanessa Barica lifted the threat of extradition, and that is that the American prison system is so bloody awful that somebody with mental health issues would be a risk of suicide if they were put into them. So that's the grounds on which the appeal will be fought. Now, I've got no interest, and I don't think any of us have got any interest in fighting that appeal on the basis of trying to calibrate exactly how mentally ill Julian is, or exactly what his autism amounts to. That's what the United States will do. That's how low they've sunk. That's where they'll fight this, right in the gutter. We want to fight on the other half of this argument, that the American prison system is so brutal, in the words of this judge, and a judge very sympathetic to the Americans, but in her language, it is an oppressive system. And we know that to be true. There is a mountain of evidence about the way in which particularly the Supermax prison, particularly the special administrative measures under which Julian would be held, in which he would only have 2 phone calls a month to anybody outside his legal team. That would be the sole contact with his family. Now, there's a mountain of evidence about how brutal the American prison system is, and an important part of the campaign all the way up and through this appeal, if it takes place, will be for the whole of society to know loud and clear that this is not a system into which any human being should be put, and particularly not one who is vulnerable. So that's going to be an important part of our campaign, to get that voice, to get that information out there. And of course, we also want to be fighting for him to be immediately released. He should have been released on bail. I was talking to one of Jeremy's colleagues in Parliament, an MP, actually a Tory MP, who said he couldn't believe that Julian hadn't just walked out of the court a free man on Monday after the threat of extradition was lifted. Now, he's being held because the United States claim, and the judge agreed with him, that he's a flight risk. But that is nonsense. Because of that judgment, and this is what's very odd about Vanessa Barica, she couldn't seem to get her head around the significance of her own judgment. Because she ruled that there is no grounds on which he should be extradited. The United Kingdom is now the safest place in the world for Julian Assange. If he were to go to any other country, the United States could initiate a fresh set of extradition proceedings. He would be rearrested and dragged all through this again. He is not going to leave the United Kingdom when he's just had a judgment in his favour, a judgment which has every chance of being upheld on appeal, because there has never been an extradition that's been quashed on these grounds and then won again at the appeal stage. So he's safest here, and with the best chance of upholding the quashing of the extradition treaty in a British court, he is simply not going to go anywhere else. That's quite apart from the fact that his family, his partner, his children are all here. And we need to take up this argument about the safety of Belmarsh as well. Now, the judge accepted yesterday in court, simply on the word of the Belmarsh authorities themselves, taken to the court by the American prosecution, that there are only 3 COVID positive cases in Belmarsh. Now, I'm sorry, in London, 30% of the population is COVID positive. It absolutely beggars belief that that figure is not the same or worse in Belmarsh. It simply cannot be true that there are only 3 COVID positive patients in Belmarsh. And if there are, by the way, if it is indeed the safest place in London, perhaps we should all head down there and ask for asylum to save ourselves from the threat of infection by COVID. But if that's true, then why is it in lockdown? Why is it that Stella Morris can't visit Julian Assange if it's so safe for her and everybody else to go into Belmarsh? This simply doesn't make sense. So we have to campaign very, very clearly on the threat of being put into the American system. We have to campaign to get Julian out of Belmarsh as quickly as we possibly can. But we also have to keep on campaigning over the freedom of the press. The judge's judgment was a disastrous judgment for freedom of the press, a vicious, unpleasant judgment which upheld, in the words of the American prosecution, and sometimes indeed exceeding what the American prosecution had said in court, a very real threat to the freedom of the press. And just because the appeal will be fought on different grounds doesn't mean that this isn't important. The surrounding noise, the surrounding political atmosphere about freedom of the press is still the thing that has the best chance of influencing the judges and making sure that they uphold the quashing of the extradition case. So keep fighting on freedom of the press, keep fighting on the right of whistleblowers to tell you the truth about what your government's doing, keep fighting on the right of journalists to print it without the threat of imprisonment. And then we will have the best possible chance of making the case that somebody who did these things to all our benefits should not be thrown into a penal system which is oppressive. That's the case now. That's the direction we're heading in. We've won round 1. Let's make sure that we won the final round as well.
Thank you very much,